And thank you for joining us today. My name is Fadzai Pasi, and I am a member of the Australian Business Events Association Emerging Leaders Council. Today, we have an incredible lineup of speakers who are ready to jump into a very important topic, continuing back on the last webinar that we had about leadership. Firstly, I'd like to take a moment to acknowledge the traditional owners of the lands which we're all joining from today, and to recognise any Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people present. I am joining you from Camaragal land, and I pay my respects to elders past, present, and emerging across all of these lands. A few housekeeping things to take note of before we start. We have set moments during the webinar for Q&A, as well as time at the end to take questions from the audience. Please keep your microphone on mute unless you're speaking. And when we open the floor for audience questions, you're welcome to raise your hand and we'll come to you so you can ask your questions directly. If you want, feel free to pop your questions into the chat at any time throughout the webinar, and our council members will be monitoring this and they can raise them on your behalf. So, if you're wondering who the Emerging Leaders Council are, a few of us have blue backgrounds, others struggle to find them, but we are a diverse collective of early to mid-career business event professionals who identify as future leaders within our industry. Our members represent a broad mix of industry sectors, roles, interests, and locations, which is something that we are incredibly proud of. Our purpose is to support and develop the next generation of leaders through education, community, and events just like the one we have today. From mates to manager, stepping into your first leadership role. I'm very excited to introduce the panel that we have today. I would go as far as to say that it is a star-studded panel of the business events industry, but do not feel any pressure. But today we've got Dan Lindero, co-founder of Turnkey Event Solutions and TES Recruitment. With more than 30 years experience leading businesses across Australia, China, and the UK, Dan brings global executive insight and deep expertise in leadership development. As an EMCC accredited senior practitioner coach and co-founder of Turnkey Event Solutions, Dan is very passionate about helping emerging leaders, such as ourselves, step into management with confidence and purpose. Joining Dan, we also have Jordana Shoya, CEO of This Space Creative. Jordana started her career in hospitality and venue operations. She has since progressed through leadership roles including COO and CEO while helping grow This Space Creative into new markets. With more than 18 years in hospitality and events, she brings a practical, people-first perspective on building empowered, high-performing teams. And finally, to round it off, we have Amy Buttery, Head of Incentives and Destination Experiences at Aranex. Originally from London and now based in Sydney, Amy has built a global career spanning conferences, exhibitions, corporate events, and venue management. Having progressed from coordinator to senior leader, overseeing multiple teams and major national and international clients, we're very excited to have Amy as well as the rest of the panel join us and offer their honest insights into navigating that transition from peer to leader. Now, without further ado, I'd like to pass on to Dan, who'll start us off with a quick presentation. Thank you, Dan.
Thanks, Fads. The team at the Emerging Leaders Council have asked me to pull some slides together for you, which
I am not sure if it looks like it for anyone else, but there is a chance that Dan may have frozen, which is not an issue.
Am I back, Fads?
Oh, yep.
Yes, you're back.
Sorry about that. I've got these slides which talk to the issues that we as executive coaches and mentors see that emerging leaders, upcoming leaders face when they're coming into a promotion, into a new role. I've mixed that content a little bit with my own experience, but really my objective is to give you some opportunity to really reflect on your journey into leadership. So Fads, can we have the next slide, please? So what I'd ask you to think about just for a minute is what are you fearful of when transitioning into a leadership role, whether you're thinking about it now or whether you are already newly into a role like this. What is it that you're most fearful of in relation to that transition? And name it. Perhaps write it down for yourself. And that could be different for many people. There are certainly some similarities. For me, it wasn't really a fear of moving from mates to manager. It was really a move as a very young leader. I was promoted very unexpectedly at the age of 25 to lead a national team. I went from a sales rep to leading a group of really experienced people. I ended up being the youngest of the whole team and managing people much older, much wiser, much more experienced than what I was. So for me, that transition was really difficult, particularly given my upbringing. My upbringing was very much about, as a young kid, you sit around with the adults and you listen and you only speak when you're really invited to. And we had great reverence and respect for those who are older than us. So for me, the transition into working with people much more Am I back again? Yep. Sorry about that. All right, so let's go to the next slide. So really what many young leaders often face is the challenge that comes with navigating these two dimensions. The dimension between courage and care. The courage to say the things that we need to say as leaders versus the care that we have for the relationships with the people that we're working with. This is often the main issue that we face when we go from being mates to managers, so to speak. If we don't have the courage, but we have the care, then we are in the left-hand upper quadrant here. This is where essentially nothing much happens here, right? So we've got a lot of care for the relationship. We don't have the courage. We don't say what we need to say, and we're avoiding issues ultimately. Where we want to be as leaders is to be able to talk about the difficult subjects, but also care for the relationship as well. So in negotiation theory, business negotiation theory, there's a really nice term that they use, which I think really applies here. When you're negotiating, they say, be hard on the problem, but be easy on the people. And this is exactly what you want to be doing. Be hard on the problem, seek to understand the issues so that we can resolve them, but be easy on the people. Yeah, so this is what we're trying to achieve, to be in that right-hand upper quadrant. And this is where we have what we call generative conversations, where we seek to understand one another. Fads, next slide, please. So let's just talk a bit about three key areas that we see very commonly that are challenging for emerging leaders. Mindset, integrity and authenticity, and setting clear expectations of your team. So let's start with mindset, because everything ultimately starts with mindset, no matter whether it be leadership or whether it be in sporting or whatever it might be. So next slide, Mads. So first question for you is, are you going to be a manager or are you going to be a leader? I think this is a really important question you should consider for a moment. Managers, typical management traits are those associated with being very task-oriented, more often seen telling people what to do, controlling things. Whereas leadership is all about understanding that our own success is only through the efforts of others. We're people-oriented. We understand that we need to inspire others. We need to influence their behaviours. and we need to be asking questions, seeking to understand, and coaching people. So these are two very different things. They do overlap, as you can see, but it's a question for you to ask yourself: what do you want to be, a manager or a leader? Next slide, Faz. So in terms of mind shift, there's a few things I'd like to share with you and leave you with. And the first of all is that as you move into a leadership role, those relationships that you have need to be reframed. The relationships don't have to end by any stretch of the imagination, but the nature of those relationships must evolve, because as the leader, you are accountable for the outcome of the team. And companies have options. If you're not prepared to have the conversations with your mates, those difficult conversations, and that undermines the performance of the team. Companies have options of maybe having someone else do it who don't have those relationships and can have those conversations. So we need to evolve those relationships. Yeah. And if you're not prepared for that, then maybe the leadership role is not really for you just yet, perhaps. Second point, really to understand, is what got you to the promotion is not what's going to keep you in the promotion. Yeah, and so this is a funny one, because in business we get singled out because we've done a great job, we're really well skilled at something, we've been performing really well, and then someone says, "Oh, I think Fads over there could be a great leader," but the skill set is actually different. The skills that got you there are not the skills that are going to necessarily keep you there. I think we have to remember this, because now as a leader, we're working through others to get the result rather than doing things ourselves. So we need to expand our toolkit. We need to put new skills into that toolkit so that we stay in our leadership roles. The job's not about authority. It's about earning trust and respect. It's about motivating others. Yeah, it's not about being bossy and telling people what to do. It's really about motivating others to do what they need to do in order to succeed. And when it comes to trust, we have this really neat equation, which I know a few of you have seen before, who've been through the Emerging Leaders program. But trust, I like this formula because actually it's a kind of mechanical way of thinking about it, which we don't often come by. But if you think about trust, you think about someone who's credible. We tend to trust someone who's credible, who's got good credibility. We trust them more than someone who hasn't got credibility. You've got reliability. If someone's reliable, we tend to trust them. If they do as they say or as they promise, then we do tend to trust them more. Intimacy is about just how well we know someone. Obviously, someone we know quite well, we're going to trust more than someone we've just met, as an example. But the kicker in all this is self-interest. People perceive you to be very high on self-interest. It erodes away at trust. So that self-interest should be over in the center over here. But everything's divided by self-interest. So if someone is very high on self-interest, we don't tend to trust them. Yeah. Now, it's nice to think about it this way, because you can actually use this as a tool to work out, how can I build more trust with people? How do I build more trust with my team? And the funny thing is, if people perceive you to be high on self-interest, a really neat way of trying to deal with that is through the intimacy. If people get to know you better as a leader, they may actually understand that actually you're not so self-oriented as they might have thought you were. So getting to know your team, spending time with your team, is important in all this. Next slide, please, Faz. I wanted to share this with you, this tent leadership model from Zenga Folkman. Not that I'm a major advocate for the model, but there is part of this which I'm particularly do agree with. So it talks about these 5 pillars of leadership. And the 5 pillars are essentially 5 poles that hold this tent up. But what is interesting is the central pole is character. So and character here is defined by high honesty and integrity. And then what's interesting with this model is that the implication of the model is you can be good at all these other things, but if your character is flawed, the whole tent collapses. And I think this is really something that's really central for young leaders coming into a new leadership role is to really understand this. This honesty and integrity is of critical importance in terms of succeeding as a leader. So in my next slide, thanks, I'll just talk a bit more about that. You know, be honest, be authentic, and have integrity. Be yourself. You know, just because you know the boss, so to speak, doesn't mean you have to pretend to be anything else than who you are, right? Remember, the people you work with probably see you more than your family does. People you work with know you better than you think, and they can spot a fake pretty quickly. So just be yourself. Walk the talk, set the right example. No point saying one thing and doing another thing. Follow through on promises. And if you can't follow through on promises, don't make promises. Yeah, you're trying to win trust with your team. Model your core values. Your core values should be aligned with the values of the company. If you're talking cross purposes to the values of the company and where the company is heading, then your team will become disillusioned. Maybe this is not the right place for you. Yeah. There needs to be that alignment. Confront difficult problems. If you want your team to confront difficult problems, you have to set that example, right? You've got to be able to do that yourself. Answer questions truthfully, even when the news is hard. Yeah. And your job does not require you to know every relevant detail. Yeah. To get to the promotion, you needed to know every relevant detail. You were doing the job really well, but actually you don't need that now. You need to surround yourself with people who've got the answers, people who've got the skills, and your job is ensuring you've got the right people in the right places at the right time so that your orchestra plays fantastic music. Yeah. Next slide, Fads. And finally, the last slide I just wanted to share with you, which is the third thing we see, and it's mainly because young leaders struggle with this care courage dynamic, is that expectations of the team are not set clearly. So that sometimes to set the expectations requires a bit of a negotiation, a bit of a discussion, and sometimes that's not so easy. So what happens is the targets or the expectations are a little bit grey. If you roll the calendar forward and you're 3 or 4 months down the track and there's been poor performance going on in the team and you want to talk to that team member about it and they say to you, well, your expectations weren't very clear, this is going to be a much worse conversation down the track than what it could have been up front in terms of setting the expectation. So navigate that care and courage upper right-hand quadrant, knowing that that's going to help you avoid having really difficult conversations down the track. So no grey areas, set the team up to succeed from the beginning. So those are my high-level tips for you. I'm back to Fads and the team.
Okay, thank you very much, Dan, for that very thought-provoking presentation. I know there are definitely some points you made there where you're talking about, what type of leader do you want to be, and that it's always evolving, which I'm sure it resonated with myself, and there are surely people on the call who had also resonated with. I think it's definitely lined us up perfectly for the panel discussion that we're about to have. So we're now going to shift to that and we'll bring in Amy and Jordana. But before we get into that, I just want to remind people, please feel free to put any questions you have, be it about the presentation or any questions you want to ask to the panelists. Feel free to put them in the chat and we will be able to get to them. Now, I will just stop sharing my screen for a second so that we can see more of the panelists that we do have. And I guess first question goes to yourself, Amy. So just so everyone gets a chance to get to know a bit more about you, you've had the chance to build your career in 2 different continents, progress through the ranks, and can you take us back to your first leadership position? Tell us how you ended up in that role and what surprised you the most.
Yeah, of course. Thanks, Spence. My first leadership role actually came quite organically. So Dan, a little bit different from you in that I've been consistently working my way through project teams. So I come from a very heavy operational background. So I've done kind of every aspect of conferencing before. And I think inherently conference and event management planning is very hierarchical. You're working in project teams. You're very familiar with that structure where you're commanding a team, kind of getting everyone motivated, mobilizing a group of people to reach an outcome. So it would have been a few years ago, and it happened quite naturally. It was kind of working my way up through different positions, and I kind of came into the role. And I think the thing that surprised me the most was probably two things. And again, Dan, you touched really beautifully on this. You are suddenly your output is now not necessarily the question. It's kind of everyone else in the team. So working out that you can do the best job, but if your team either don't know what you're trying to achieve or you haven't communicated well, it really is other people's success that is your success. So very much a big mindset shift, which is something to kind of get your head around. I think probably the other thing that surprised me is there is no silver bullet for being a good manager. I think in my head, I was like, oh, I'll be in this position and, I read some books and I'll watch some videos and podcasts and I'll learn everything I can about being a manager. And suddenly overnight, that will be a significant change in how I behave and how I manage. And unfortunately, there is no silver bullet. It's very much learning through doing, consistently improving and implementing things. And I think being authentic and behaving with integrity is the easiest way to do that. But it's not just something you pick up overnight. It's very much an ongoing process. I'm very fortunate. We work with some incredible managers at Aranex, and I think we would all say that you are constantly learning and developing. So it isn't this level that you get to and that's it, you kind of know everything. It will always be a continual learning process, I think, which is why it's so rewarding and makes it so fun. So I think that was probably two of my biggest surprises about being in that role.
Very much for that. And Jordana, I'll come to you because similarly, you've had the chance to grow in your career and had the opportunity to gain a range of experience to now being CEO of This Space Creative. How did that journey look, and how did your understanding of leadership evolve with that journey?
Yeah, this is a really good question. It's been a bit of a trip down memory lane here, because I feel like it's all happened quite fast, but at the same time, there's actually so many milestones, I guess, that I went through to get to where I am now. And I guess the first kind of part when I was looking at this was the start of my journey really wasn't, it was very non-linear. There was no master plan to become a CEO. It evolved through a series of opportunities and challenges, and saying yes to things that stretched me. I think in the last, particularly the last 5 years, that is where the biggest stretch, I guess, happened. I started out in events, I was client-facing roles where I learned the importance of relationships, communication, delivering things under pressure. Over time, I was fortunate to gain exposure across many different areas of businesses through operations, much like Amy, you spoke to. Operations is heavily my background. Project delivery, sales and partnerships, client management and strategy. And I think each role gave me a broader perspective of how organizations actually function. I think one thing I've learned is that at every stage of leadership, it really requires you to let something go, and to trust the team that you have around you. Early in my career, success came from doing the work well myself. And as I progressed, I had to learn how to trust others, to delegate, coach, and empower people. That was probably one of my biggest shifts. And to date, still is a constant shift for me. I like being in the do, and I think I'm so fortunate enough to have the most incredible team I've ever worked with at This Space Creative now. So it definitely has been a big shift there. And I think the further I moved into leadership, it became less about me personally and more about creating opportunities for others and building strong teams and helping them grow. That's probably the part of leadership I enjoy most today. Yeah.
Okay, thank you very much for that. You both definitely touched on still growing. So it wasn't a matter of you've gotten there and it's like, okay, we're done. I've made it. And that is very much also something that Dan was also talking about. But another thing that you guys mentioned was obviously the progression through the ranks and really what this webinar would be talking about is, going from mates to managers. So obviously you were in a team with other people all at the same level and have moved on, now to being their management. So I think I'll come to you, Amy, for this one. What was it like managing people who had previously been your peers or teammates, and how did you navigate that shift in the dynamic?
Yeah, I think it can sometimes feel uncomfortable, and I think the dynamic inevitably shifts. So whether you address it or not, I think there will always be a change. But I think seeing it as a positive, and I think one of the superpowers at work is if you can turn something that others find challenging into something constructive and positive, is one of the things that I think has been a game changer in how I approach things. So I think rather than pretending it wasn't happening, I think approaching it in a constructive way, being really consistent is good. And Dan, you mentioned this earlier as well, but I think you can change your approach to something and your relationship with someone can change. But I think inherently, if you are behaving with integrity, you behave as yourself. It's actually impossible to pretend to be a different type of manager. We spend so much time with people in event management. I think some of my team members I've spent more time with than my family. So you cannot behave differently with people when you're around them that much. So I think being really consistent with how you are, how you treat people. Yes, absolutely. Some of the conversations might change, or, there might be performance conversations, but I think ultimately the North Star is that you still care about your peers, you care about your colleagues, you want the best for them. You're just able to facilitate that in a slightly different way. So I see it as a benefit, and I think being transparent and having discussions to kind of, if it is awkward, and maybe addressing it. I think when you don't address things, the elephant in the room can sometimes become the biggest challenge in a situation more than the actual situation itself. So and I think thinking about positives as well, you've been in that position, you're now potentially in a position, you understand all of the pressures of the role and what the team need. You are uniquely positioned to be able to, proceed with that for them and make sure that we're making changes and that we're implementing things. So I think see that as a benefit rather than a challenge or something that you should be scared of. I think it's a fun challenge to get stuck into. That's kind of how I describe it.
Yeah, thank you for that mention of the challenge and us working in events. We always love a challenge, but something else that you mentioned was obviously that it can be uncomfortable. And when we work so close together, people are often traveling together, etc. You don't want anything to fester until it's a bit too late to cover. And I guess like it does talk on the point of making hard calls, which Jordana, I might ask yourself, so how do you hold on to the relationships you've built while also establishing yourself as a person who set those expectations and make those hard calls?
Yeah. Um, I actually find this is one of my biggest challenges, I think, especially, and then the biggest shift, I guess, I made from going from a COO role to a CEO role. I think stepping into the CEO role made that particularly real for me because many of the people who I have relationships with and who know me, I've had this a different relationship with that's now having that shift to a slightly different way of managing and leading, I guess. I quickly realized in that time that leadership wasn't about creating distance between myself and the team. I think I really struggled of like, what do I do and what's the best way? And like, I think many of, Amy and then Dan, you've touched on as well. It's like, you can't just learn and shift those things overnight. Like, I think it's like being authentic, being true to who you are as a person because you've built those relationships for a reason. Those people, you've built that trust and that relationship with your teammates already. It's now just having the conversation of like, yeah, this is a bit of a shift, and yeah, like this is going to slightly change how we work together. But I think it's still being giving them a voice and giving them the opportunity still to come along with you on that journey because it's not only a journey for yourself, it's a journey for your team and for the individual relationships that you already have. Um, I think knowing that I can still be a support and approachable and who I am, but I think because I've already had those relationships, you're already gaining that respect in most situations to be able to have, I guess, those hard conversations of like, hey, like, let's chat about this. And I think it's doing that earlier on in the piece. I think, Amy, you talked to that as well of like, don't sit on things for too long. Give clarity. Clarity keeps coming up. It's a word that keeps, coming up, setting expectations, and being honest. And I think that is built over time. So whilst I did have, and I still do have those challenges at times of how to approach certain things, depending on what it is, I think it does come back to, again, values and your core values and how that aligns with the relationships you've already built and the company that you work for. I've never worked for a company like this space before, in the sense of the last 5 years, I've had the biggest growth and development probably ever. And I think that's because we have really, really good core values that align with me and I think align with our team. And I think that also makes it harder to make hard calls and to have, those conversations and have that shift, I guess.
Thank you for that. You did mention that it is a journey, right? And you said it's not only a journey for yourself, but for the team. And I guess, having those conversations, you can, Dan mentioned, you can measure your success through the team. So it's no longer just measured through yourself. So, it sounds like both of you have mentioned, there are those hard conversations, but they all happen for a reason. And Dan, I'll stick to sort of this same, from mates to manager, and hopefully I've given you enough time to rest after the presentation. But what advice would you give for any managers who are worried about, being liked, and, how can they balance warmth with authority?
Yeah. I think look, the message I've always given leaders who've worked for me is that anyone can do the easy stuff. Anyone can do the easy stuff. The stuff that leaders are paid to do is the hard stuff, right? So you've got to be prepared to take those difficult decisions. And I think as long as you do things in a respectful way, you do things in a way which is compassionate, then people will at least respect the fact you've had to make a tough decision. They may not like it, no doubt, but at least they'll respect that you've done it and you've done what you had to do in that regard. So I think that there's got to be a shift. It comes down to mindset again. There's got to be a mindset shift away from everyone loving me to people respecting me for what I need to do, but yet working in an environment where everyone is valued, and it is respectful and it is inclusive.
No, thank you very much for that, Dan. And yes, you just mentioned there the mindset shift, and we obviously looked at it in the presentation, and it sounds like it's quite an important, step for anyone that is either aspiring or have stepped into, being a new manager. And with that Venn diagram that you showed, there was management versus leadership, and not necessarily saying that, you don't want to be one side or the other, because obviously times will pop up where you need one more than the other. But, there was that intersection in the middle where it sort of was like the two perfectly meeting. And so, just, I might ask yourself this, how hard is it to find sort of that intersection, and what are key things that you look for to understand when you're managing more than leading, and vice versa?
Yeah, I feel like I've used the word challenges a lot in this because they're constant challenges. And I think as leaders, I think we constantly need to be challenged because it does make us better. I've tried to break it down. I was trying to break this down into like, for everyone, I guess, and leaning on what Dan mentioned earlier with his chart of like what a manager typically is and what a leader is. And I kind of try to break it down in the sense of a manager is more, how can I help my team do this well? And then a leader is, how can we achieve this together? And then I look at, okay, well, my role now in the business is, how do I create an environment where everyone can succeed? So that's kind of how I've broken it down a little bit, and I guess my way of explaining it is it's learning to look at the capabilities in others. That it's again not about you, it's about the team around you and what that best long-term solution is in coaching someone else to do the do. There, I guess it is a sweet spot, and it's probably one of the hardest things to get right. And again, I think that's leaning into your values and your authenticity and being honest with your team. Yeah, that would be probably my response.
Yeah, thank you for that. Dan, I might actually just throw to you real quick, especially still looking sort of at that Venn diagram. You know, you've had a chance to work with a lot of managers and you know, do constant training. Do you ever see one side showing up more? And, you know, like would you say, what are the dangers of that happening?
Oh yeah, you definitely see it showing up more. In fact, I've had many managers tell me they're not leaders, and which is rather frightening. But you know, it does depend a bit on the construct of the job, to be
Mm,
honest. You know, so I think we have to be fair that there are roles which are kind of just manager roles, right?
mm,
But you know, what I will always say to everyone is that every role has leadership in it. We all have leadership within each of us. You know, no one qualifies for a leadership role unless they can actually prove they can lead themselves first, right? You know, I would not promote anyone unless I'm convinced that person can actually manage their own targets, their own KPIs, manage their own health properly. Because how, if they can't do that, how could I ever think they could do it for a team? Look after the well-being of a team, look after a whole team's delivery. So we all have leadership in us. Um, but certainly some jobs are more oriented towards the managerial side than others for sure.
And Fads, sorry, can I just jump in there as well? I think you're so right there, Dan, because I think it really does depend on the team and the situation, but also the growth stage of the business. I think, yeah, that's a really good point.
I'd also love to jump in. Sorry, that really resonated. I think to both of your points, I think take the opportunities that are presented to you to start learning how to be a leader. So it doesn't have to be in a formal position, you know, it doesn't have to be a role necessarily within your company. We're so lucky in event management that we work with so many different suppliers, clients, events that we work on. There are always leadership opportunities in all of your interactions, whether they're very obvious or not. And I think just being able to identify them, looking at feedback that you've got, thinking critically, okay, I handled that very well, I didn't handle that as well. You can be doing that every day. It doesn't have to be in a formal line management experience. So have a think about that. And is there anything that you can get that's experience ongoing without it being, like a set process in your company?
It's everyone on the panel talking to each other. Um, so thank you guys for that insight. I do want to go back to also the presentation. Dan, your first slide, sorry, the questions for Amy, but Dan, your slide showed you know, the question, what am I fearful of? And I wrote down a point, you know, for myself, and I hope everyone else on the call also did have the chance to, you know, put, you know, what their fear is, be it spiders or, you know, something in the professional world, if they had the chance to write it down. But what I said for myself in terms of, you know, it's not necessarily a fear, but more of a feeling. Uh, and it's, you know, the feeling of imposter syndrome, which I'm sure many people of this call, I hope I'm not by myself, have, you know, sometimes that fear and that feeling of imposter syndrome. So, Amy, you know, many first-time managers, they experience that and, you know, wonder whether they're ready for the role. How can you leaders distinguish between healthy self-reflection and self-doubt that is holding them back?
Yeah, Fads, I think you're probably not the only person on the call that gets imposter syndrome. And I think I would be worried if anyone wasn't critical or thinking through things that they could improve or do better. I think healthy self-reflection is a huge part of being a good employee, a good manager. So I think I kind of separate the two. So I think self-doubt is when it's a debilitating feeling that is stopping you doing something. So it tends to be for me anyway, it's a negative feedback loop. I question a decision that I've made, or I don't think I've handled the situation particularly well, and it stops me either doing that again in future or stops me emailing someone or thinking about something. So it's that kind of debilitating stop loop, which is not a healthy behavior in a work context. Whereas I think healthy self-reflection is something we all should be doing. And it's fantastic if you have things like performance reviews, or if you do journaling, or, something outside of work where you're reflecting on your behavior and your improvements. But I think that I find is a proactive feeling. It's helpful. It's leading me to a different action. It's like, next time I'll do this, or I've learned from this. And it kind of builds your awareness without making you feel horrible and stopping you doing that in future. So that's kind of how I distinguish them. When I'm in that kind of stop negative loop, that's when I know it's self-doubt, and I try and cut that one off and then turn it into reflection to make it a positive, actionable outcome. It's hard. It's not, I don't think anyone has a perfect balance of it, but it's something that everyone goes through. And I think just know that not everyone has the answer for everything. No one is a perfect manager and handles every situation perfectly. You do your best with the information that you have based on what you're doing at the moment. And I think that if that underpins everything that you do, making a few mistakes here and there and having some self-doubt is completely normal. I think to an extent, the reflection is really healthy. I think you should be thinking, oh, I could improve that and I'll do that next time. So.
Yeah, so yeah, you really touched on the point of being, almost being prepared to fail, because it does, if you're perfect all the time, you then don't have something to reflect on. So, yeah, having that preparedness to fail seems to help. Now, there was a question that came through the chat, which I'll throw it to the panel, and everyone also feel free to continue putting in your questions. So I might come to you, Amy, because I know that Aranex has teams sort of throughout Australia, and this one was sort of asking about creating team culture, especially while often working remotely.
Yeah, we're so lucky at Aranex. We have teams across Australia, New Zealand, and the Philippines as well. So we are very adept at different time zones, which is a challenge in itself, but also making sure that the culture across all of the teams is cohesive and making it a nice place to work. And I think, again, I talked about this earlier in terms of challenges and making them a positive. I think having such a varied team culture and having the team all across the country and across Australia and New Zealand is a selling point. The teams have flexibility. They have the opportunity to kind of meet other teams and interact with them. So we set up regular meetings. So we're very much a kind of check-in. We do coffee mornings, quizzes. There's a Tuesday quiz that's very competitive across the different teams. So having those kind of regular non-work touch points. And then just thinking about, from a work perspective, how best to schedule the week with different meetings and making sure that we're doing check-ins. We have a shout-out channel, so we kind of integrate different teams and promote people's achievements and things that they've done well. So mixing really the work side of things with the, I say leisure, it's obviously still in work time, but making sure that the leisure part is just as important. You spend time, when I say you spend time with people you work with, yes, it's in person, but also on Teams calls. I've spent hours on Teams calls with my team. It isn't just something that you can flick a switch and culture is there. It's that consistent, repetitive meetings, checking in with people, making sure that people have a network that they feel they're supported with, and more than just kind of, operational meetings. It has to be that step beyond.
Yeah, thank you. Jordana, Dan, anything you also want to put on that, or you think Amy, encapsulated it perfectly?
Yeah, you did. I think like we have a team nationally as well, and I think similar to you, Amy, we have an entire teams chat. We have a stand up on a Monday morning just to talk about like our weekends and our highlights, even lowlights if that is the case. I think it's also comes through the hiring process too. I think it's so important during that process to look at the team that you have. Obviously, you have to look from a business perspective and from those lenses as well. But I think it's finding like-minded people who are aligned with your core values is so important. And I think that's where we've really hit the nail within this space. We all have very similar values. We hero each other's skill sets, and yeah, we make it fun. So whilst there are busy times and stressful times, at the end of the day, we're all in it together and we bounce off each other a lot. And you know, I mean, harness the power of collaboration, our tagline, just getting a little plug there, is like it's truly who we are. We're a collaborative bunch of people. So that kind of helps with our culture and has it gives space for a voice for everyone, really.
I think the mention that you made of the hiring process is actually very interesting because I like to think that the the motivation for this webinar was actually when I did the Leading Well program with Dan and we spoke as a team that I was really in a position of about to becoming a manager for someone that I actually went to TAFE with and that I was friends outside of work that we brought in. And so it was quite interesting because, that didn't end up panning out. But we then hired the person that works under me, great worker. And we looked at the head versus the heart versus the gut, which Dan, you always talk about. And I very much am someone that works based off of the head, so I really think about numbers and how does this work, etc. Whereas I felt like I needed someone to come in that would not only think that way, that, will bring heart and gut and sort of be like, hey, like I've just got a feeling that this will be better. And so it worked out
Mm.
perfectly. And, the hiring aspect makes the team very important. Now, there are quite a few questions coming in, and I did have more questions, but I'd actually really like to step into them. What I'll just quickly do is ask a question, then I'll share my screen as it gets answered. But there was one that came in from Trish, which really continued the conversation of creating that culture because you all spoke about Teams calls. And Dan, we haven't heard from you for some time. So, what are your thoughts on team meetings versus one-on-one meetings and their regularity in the calendar?
Well, look, I'm going to admit here I may be biased, but I am a face-to-face guy, right? We work in the face-to-face industry. You meet with clients, things get done face-to-face. You meet with clients on Zoom, things seem to go on forever and ever. And it's kind of the same thing with staff. It's you want to build relationships. Yeah, face-to-face is much more powerful. You want to keep the relationship just ticking on. Yeah, Zoom's good for that. So there's never going to be a substitute for face-to-face in terms of being the best way to interact with humans, in my view.
Okay, thank you. And anything from Jordana or Amy on that point, or
I mean, I could just keep talking, to be honest. I love it. I mean, I'm the same with you, Dan. I love a face to face. I'm a hugger kind of person. I love to just be in someone's company because I think you get so much more from people when you can feel the warmth with someone. You can share a cup of coffee. You can have that personal moment with them. I think, but also there is a place for online. Like for example, this webinar right now. I think whilst they can go off into a lot of us have met each other on this call personally. I think it's also there's value in having this opportunity, I guess, to meet online and that accessibility to doing that. So yeah, bit of both.
I agree. The only thing I'd add in terms of regularity is that it's very dependent on the team that you're managing. I know some people love to have weekly catch-ups, others happy with a month. And I think being able to adapt your management style and meeting cadence to suit that is fantastic. I think the biggest thing as a manager I try and do is removing any friction to coming to me with a problem or an issue. So if that is a weekly check-in or whatever, that's great. If it's fortnightly, that's fine. But the team have to feel that they have direct access to you if they need something, or they don't want to sit and worry about something for 2 weeks before the next one-to-one. So I think, yeah, cadence is very flexible depending on the team and individuals that you manage.
now conscious of time, but the questions are still rolling in, which is very exciting to see. It means it's resonating with a lot of people on the call. We have a question here. and it's for everyone, so please feel free to just step in if you're ready to go. But have you ever had to choose between protecting a friendship and doing what was right? Oh, sorry. Have you ever had to choose between protecting a friendship and doing what was right for the team?
Yeah, I think we built we there's people I can think of people in my career where I was very close to them. I wouldn't call them best mates that would go spend weekends together or anything, but very close work colleagues, and circumstances changed within the business, and we had to make people redundant, and having to make those decisions. I mean, I still think about those situations, many years later. So they do stay with you. Were they the right decisions at the time? Yeah, they were. Does it make it any easier? Not really. But that's just life. That comes with the job, unfortunately.
Mm. You go, Amy.
I was going to say, yes. Yes, I think it's, sometimes it does happen. I think my view on it is quite black and white. I think ultimately you are employed to do a role and you have a responsibility to the team and the company. I think that should be your North Star. And then I think, unfortunately, sometimes friendships at work come secondary to that. You have to know that you're behaving with integrity and doing the right thing in a work capacity, because that's what you're employed to do. So yeah, I think it's quite a black and white approach, but that would be mine.
I would say I'm a bit like you, Amy, in that sense as well. There's a one particular moment, I guess, in my career where that probably shook me a little bit, where I've had to make decisions on a friendship and a decision for the business. And I think, like you said, Dan, it stays with you. It doesn't haunt you because you learn from it, but it stays with you. And I think it's because you care. And I think knowing and keeping a line and authentic with what you are doing and being honest and truthful on that pathway, I think is really important. Whilst you can't necessarily always share that with the wider team, I think giving some clarity to the team of the situation that it might be, and having to explain that, but also to the person that you have that friendship with. I think it's honest conversations, which again is one of those times where it's like, okay, we need to have a hard conversation. And I don't know if hard conversation is the right word. We just need to have an honest conversation. I'm doing this and I'm speaking personally, and then I'm speaking from a business point of view. And I kind of flip between the two when I am speaking in that sense, because I want to show that I'm vulnerable with that person and that there's that friendship that I care deeply about, but I also want to give the side of the business of why that decision's being made. So I think, yeah, it's again a balance.
Thank you. Very conscious for time now, but there's really one good one that's come in from Rachel, and I think it does touch on what you guys did just talk about there, but elevates it, because it sort of isn't just looking at the friendship, but it's when you're managing very, very close friends. So how do you maintain boundaries and fairness when managing friends when you've got more insight into their personal situations than a normal manager would have, and you're also across sensitive company information that they aren't? It's a very tough one. So
Yeah. I try and imagine that I don't know that stuff. What would I do if I didn't have all this context? Context is a good thing, and it's also can be an anchor for us as leaders. So I think if I didn't know this, what would I be doing? That would be my sort of compass in terms of what the right decision would be, and then I'd try and navigate it from there.
Dan, I would agree with you. I think having access to sensitive company information is part of a leadership role, and that should go no further than you and the people that it's meant for. I think that's a very black and white kind of clear distinction. I think sometimes having insight into people's personal life isn't the worst thing in the world, and it might not be that because you're friends with them. It could be that you just know. I think having information about people that they have given you in a leadership context can be helpful to make sure that you can sometimes get a good outcome for both the company and the individual. But Dan, I agree, the company has to come first in the sense of fairness and boundaries. And you do have to be careful when you're thinking about that because, yeah, it has to be fair for everyone that is in your team.
I agree.
Well, thank you very much to all of you for answering those. And I should apologize to Jet, who was just the last person whose question just didn't make it through. But as you can see on the screen, our speakers and panelists have thankfully shared their LinkedIns. So please feel free to connect with them. As I said, they're a star-studded panel of the business events industry. They're definitely people that you can reach out to, and so thank you very much to them. So, as we wrap up this session, firstly, I'd just like to extend a very heartfelt thank you to our panelists, Amy, Jordana, and Dan, for sharing your experiences, lessons, and insights with us. You've provided some fantastic practical advice and very thought-provoking perspectives, which I'm sure everyone will walk away from. And also, I'd like to also thank you, emerging leaders who have stepped into the call, taking this time out of your day. It does mean a lot seeing your support while you guys are here. I'd just like to share before we finish just some things that we are doing as the Emerging Leaders Council. So you can join the council LinkedIn group. I do see some familiar names, so you guys are a part of it, but for anyone that isn't, please feel free to scan the QR code that is on screen. And finally, we will send a recording of this webinar, which will have a link to the survey. We would appreciate hearing any kind words, anything that you think we can work on, or any feedback that you have for ourselves as a council. Feel free to scan the QR code. But as we said, thank you again for joining us today, and we hope to see you at future Emerging Leaders Council events.